Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Hope you guys are doing well. I want to say happy Friday. And I say that not just because Friday kicks off the weekend, but Friday just happens to be my favorite day. And also, given everything that's going on, you may forget what day it is. So that's another reason I'm saying happy Friday. So I know there's been a lot about let's see. One moment. I'm trying to advance. Well, that's interesting. Now I'm trying to advance the slides. It's not advancing.
That's funny.
Um, that's interesting because I had no problem on the first three slides and
That's
now it's
true.
no longer advancing.
I wonder if the recording button makes a difference. Let me stop it right now. Oh, okay. Now
I
I see your
wouldn't
first cover page.
I wouldn't think so.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, I can see it
Okay,
now.
all right, maybe so. Okay, so I know there's been a lot of talk about the need to pivot, especially in this environment, and whether we're talking about a crisis, a recession. Obviously, there is a lot going on. And I don't know about you guys, but much of the conversation I've heard about pivoting it's been kind of macro. It's been kind of big picture. In other words, I've heard a lot about the need to shift your mindset, to look at things differently, to be able to embrace change. I've also heard a lot about the need to have more of an online presence, to make sure you have a solid online strategy or digital strategy. And while I can appreciate that advice, I agree with that. I think there is a need to go deeper than that. And so I do want to do that in today's presentation. I want to provide you some solid strategies that you can implement in your own business, your brand, and just to better position you for post crisis or post COVID-19, if you will, because this is not going to be forever. And I've been saying that a lot. I remind myself of that as well as others, that this is temporary. This too shall pass. Things may look different. Certainly, the marketplace probably will look different. We'll be doing business differently, but what we're encountering right now will not last. And so, speaking of that, I know it may seem that things have kind of blown up over the last month or so. These are terms that we are all hearing more and more: crisis, pandemic, recession, even disruption. And you may have not heard that term per se, but I think many of us can agree that our lives in general has kind of been disrupted. I mean, if you look specifically at our work lives, those of us who are parents, I'm not a well, I'm kind of a parent. I have a fur baby, but those of you who have human children, I'm sure you can attest to your lives being a little disrupted. So there's certainly some disruption going on. And I do want to remind you, though, that disruption is not always a bad thing. Disruption can lead to development. So, as much as it may seem like things have kind of blown up, just keep in mind that there are still opportunities, and often really good things can come from things kind of blowing up. So, I really want you to keep that in mind, because we're going to continue to hear these terms and kind of be faced with these different scenarios. But the important thing is not to panic, even if you don't have toilet tissue. Now, I didn't warn you guys, I have a sense of humor and I don't need any help whatsoever. I can crack my own self up. So I saw this graphic and I said, I have to use that. I have to use that because there just seems to be a big thing with toilet tissue. I didn't realize there was such a, I mean, I get it, at least kind of, but yeah. So don't panic. Instead, let's pivot. And not just pivot in general, let's pivot strategically. Let's pivot in a smart way. So let's look at the first key way that we can pivot effectively and strategically. Number one, I would say to pivot your messaging. You should be prepared if you have not already done so. Hopefully, if you're in business, if you have a product or service, if you're a service provider, you have already pivoted your message because obviously things have changed. That's kind of an understatement. And at least in most cases, there's always exceptions, but in most cases, you really may need to pivot your message because your brand message and whatever your big message was before, it may no longer apply, or it may not apply in the same way. However, you were talking about your products and services before. For one, if you do nothing else, now I do want you to do more, but if you do nothing else, you do need to acknowledge what's going on. That needs to be a part of your messaging. I'm pretty sure your target market has been impacted by what's happening. I do understand some people have been impacted more than others. I mean, that goes without saying, but most, if not all of us, have been impacted in some way. And especially if you are B2B, if you serve other businesses or even organizations, you definitely need to incorporate into your messaging, into your marketing, what they are going through, because that says a lot about you as a business owner or as a service provider. Your customers, your clients, your prospects need to understand that you understand them. We hear a lot about the whole know, like, and trust factor. I'm sure all of us on have heard that before. And yes, I agree with that, but I like to go a step further. If you guys don't know me, I live to be different, at least some of the times. But I like to go a step further in terms of know, like, and trust, because it is just as, if not even more important, that your clients and your target audience knows that you know them. It's one thing for them to know you. Yes, they need to know you. They need to trust you. But they also want to know that you know them, that you get them. So you absolutely should consider pivoting your messaging. And there are a few ways to do that, or a couple of ways to look at that. Let's say, for example, your big message was more aspirational. Maybe it was, and this is going to vary, of course, depending on your product or your service. But for example, maybe your message was more about empowerment. Maybe it was more about, I can help you get to the next level. I can help you reach six figures. I can help you be in the best health of your life. Those messages are really good messages. But right now, your target market is not necessarily thinking in those aspirational, those really kind of big goal type of mindset. Many of them, they are just trying to survive. They are trying to get through perhaps the next week, the next 2 weeks, the next 30 days. Some of them have lost jobs. Some of them, their businesses have been impacted, or they've had to close up shop. And so you really need to pay attention to what your message was before, and so that you can kind of change that and make the adjustments as needed. Because some of your market, this is how they're dealing with things. If you know about Ted, you know that movie Ted, about the talking teddy bear. And if you don't, Ted was quite a character. He had a potty mouth. He had sex. I still don't quite understand that, but you'd have to see the movie. Okay. Ted was doing a lot. All right. And so some of your market may be doing just what Ted is doing here, in trying to get through this. They're just trying to fix them an adult beverage so they can deal with what they have to deal with. All right. And the other thing in terms of your messaging that can really be powerful, if you, again, and this really speaks more to those who work with other businesses, if you are B2B or organizations, help them pivot their message with their customers or their clients. That can be really important as well, and they will remember that. This is certainly the time to provide as much value as possible, and a great deal of value can be found in a solid message. This is also the time where you should certainly be reaching out to your current customers and clients and prospects. Don't forget about your prospects. Don't assume that everyone is not able to buy. No one is able to invest in your product or service. That's not necessarily the case. And so you want to keep that line of communication open. And, at times, it's not always about making a sale. This is a great time just to reach out and see how people are doing, see how their families are doing, see how their businesses are doing, and without necessarily selling something or offering something, but just to let them know that you care, that you're concerned. Now, of course, the conversation could shift to how you can help them, but they want to know, most people, if not all people, want to know that, hey, my whatever, fill in the blank, my stylist, my accountant, my whatever it is, whatever that need is that you meet for them, that they care, they genuinely care. So that's first and foremost. Consider consider pivoting in terms of your messaging. Now, number two, the second key way that you can pivot strategically, it may be necessary for you to pivot your target market, your ideal client, if you will, your dream customer. And I'm really big on getting very specific about that. I work with a lot of entrepreneurs, business owners, service providers. That's kind of my sweet spot. And I find that many are still too broad, even when they may think that they've kind of narrowed down their target market. They're still a bit broad in who they are looking to serve. And that was a struggle with me for a while also. So I absolutely get it. I think for many of us, it's hard to narrow that down because we want to help as many people as possible. And that is certainly understandable if you believe in your product or service, which you should. But understand, the more niche you become, usually the better. And I know that can seem kind of counterintuitive because you're thinking, well, I don't want to alienate people. I don't want to leave people out. Actually, you do, because everyone doesn't get it. Everyone is not going to see the value in your product or service. Your product or service is not for everyone, no matter how great it is. And so whatever market you've been working with before, and I'm not saying that you have to start from scratch, that you have to change it altogether, but it really may be helpful if you can make some adjustments, if you get more specific. One way to approach this is it's really important to know which industries tend to hold up better in a crisis, which industries tend to be kind of recession proof or crisis proof. Now, I use those terms somewhat loosely because often every industry is impacted in some way by a crisis, but not as much. There are certainly industries that fare better than others. And a few examples of those, one would be utilities. And I also include wireless services in that. Just think about it. Usually, people still need their utilities. They still need electric. They still need gas. They still need water. They certainly still need their cell phone. So that is an industry that usually holds up better in a crisis. And we're seeing that now as well. Another example, healthcare. And we definitely see that with this being a pandemic, with this being a health crisis. But that tends to be the case just overall, even in recession. If we go back to 2008, 2009, when we had the Great Recession, if you will, healthcare was a pretty strong industry then. Again, because these are services, these are things that are always going to be in demand. Even if you lose your job, unfortunately, if you lose your home, people still need healthcare. And so that's another example. A third example, media. But particular, you have to get a bit more targeted, speaking of targeting, in terms of media. Because print media, for example, has kind of struggled somewhat for a while. TV and digital media, on the other hand, very different story. And I know there is a lot of talk about social media, and I'm big on leveraging social media as well. But you got to know that the number one consumed content is still television. It's still television. The average American watches 5 to 6 hours of television. Now, that's kind of scary, but that can be a good thing for those in that industry, as well as those working with and doing business with the media industry, especially that type of media. Digital media, streaming media, think Netflix, hello, Hulu, those type of networks are thriving. And so the reason I mention that, and the reason it's important to know those industries that tend to hold up better in a crisis, is that if you can pivot your market to work with those industries, whether they're individuals within those industries or entire organizations, that could be a game changer for your business. So, before maybe you were working with professionals, that was kind of your group, your target market, professionals, or maybe it was professionals in Houston. But if you can really target more professionals in healthcare or professionals in utilities, in wireless services, again, that can present a lot more opportunity to you. So definitely, definitely keep that in mind. And I'm going to talk a bit more about niching down, because that can also be a game changer. I will give you one example of that now in terms of niching, and that also kind of aligns with your target market changing or pivoting in terms of your target market. Let's say you are a financial advisor and your target market has been those nearing retirement, perhaps those within 10 years of retirement. And so that could cover a lot of people. That does cover a lot of people, of course. But if you niche down further and maybe you focus on pre-retirees within healthcare or pre-retirees within utilities, again, it could make a big difference. Now, it may require you to kind of step up your game in terms of what you know about those industries. But I tell you, it can be absolutely worth it. And don't be afraid, again, that maybe you're going to alienate people or that you're not going to be able to reach enough people. Usually that is certainly not the case. Especially here in Houston. I mean, healthcare is booming. Healthcare is probably number one, number two in terms of our industries here. And I mean, our medical center is, nationally, internationally known. And so I don't think that is an issue in terms of the number of people in your market, even if you niche down. So just keep that in mind. But we'll talk a bit more about niching just a bit later. So number 3, the third way we can pivot has to do with your business model, pivoting your business model. And what I mean by that, and there's a few examples of that actually. Okay. I don't know what's going. Now I'm having another problem advancing
Oh,
the screens. I'm
it
sorry. I
just
don't
takes a
know what.
while.
what is causing that? Um, just a moment. Okay. Technology, you have to love it.
Right.
So few examples of pivoting your business model. Now, I mentioned this in the beginning of the presentation, and this is something that we have heard a lot about, and I'm sure we will continue to hear a lot about, and that is the ability to pivot to online, to maximize online resources, online tools, to have more of a virtual presence. And yes, I do agree with that. I just think, like I said before, I think there's a bit more to it. But I do want to talk a bit more about that, because this is something that has really come up more, I would say, over the last month and a half for business owners with bricks and mortar businesses. People with whether it's an office, whether it's a restaurant that they've had to close, or they're even if they didn't close completely, their business is significantly being impacted right now. And I was in a Facebook group like some of you. I mean, I'm in several Facebook groups, and many of them are business oriented. And I was in a Facebook group a few weeks ago, and a lady who owns a wine bar in North Houston, she was actually looking for some suggestions of how she could generate revenue, because at that time, I don't think the actual stay-at-home order had been issued yet, but I think she had either already closed or she had significantly minimized her hours or what have you, and was kind of feeling that already. And so she was looking for ways to generate revenue. And several of us, I mean, of course, what came to many of us is, you've got to find a way to take this virtual. That's one. And another suggestion was to use that space. And again, this was before, businesses were ordered to close. Find a way to use your space for other things. I mean, that is another consideration. But in terms of the virtual piece, I am a firm believer that most, if not all, I always allow for some exceptions, but I believe the majority of business owners can teach what they do. And so, as a result of that, as a result of me believing that, I think just about every business owner out there, and certainly service providers, should have a digital product, should have at least one digital product, whether that is a course, whether it is a master class. I mean, because there's different things you can call it, there's different ways you can package it, but it essentially translates into you sharing your knowledge, you sharing the, I'm sure, tremendous value you have to offer in your area of expertise with others, because there are others who want to know what you do. And that applies to product-based businesses as well. Just as that young lady who owned a wine bar, well, there's other people who are interested in owning a wine bar or owning a restaurant or owning something in that space. And if you've been doing it, as even more so, for any length of time, now I would say my idea of any length of time would be at least 3 years. Let's say you've been doing it for 3 years, and certainly if it's 5 or longer, because unfortunately, and some of us know these stats, the majority of businesses go out of business after 5 years. So if you've made it to the 5 year mark, but I say even if you made it to the 3 year mark and you've enjoyed some success, you probably have a lot you can share with someone else. And so keep that in mind in terms of another revenue stream. Just teaching, consulting on what you do so that you can help others do what you do. So that's one example, or one way that you can kind of transfer to online if you were offline. Okay. Another way to kind of pivot your business model, and again, just as I said for the target market, doesn't necessarily require you to start all over, for you to scrap your old business model altogether. Now, there are some cases where that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think this is a time really where we do really want to take a hard look at our businesses, our business model, our brands, and it may be necessary to do like some real like open heart surgery. And then in other cases, you may just need to do kind of an outpatient procedure. It may not require, that in-depth of a procedure or a change. But another example, collaborations. Are you collaborating? And by collaborations, that can look like different things. I mean, that can show up in different ways. One collaboration could certainly be with a peer. That could be with another business owner, another service provider, someone who complements what you do. There are certain cases, even where when you collaborate with a competitor. It doesn't always have to be about competition. You can collaborate versus compete. And so keep that in mind. Another way to collaborate could be with brands, with major brands as well as with not so major brands. Some of you have probably heard the term influencer. That has really exploded. Influencer marketing, it has absolutely exploded over the last roughly 5 years. Now it really goes back further than that, but I would say it has really become more of a thing, and more people have started to pay attention to influencers and influencer marketing. And if you doubt that, there's plenty of stats out there that tell us that influencer marketing is really, really big. By 2020, now this was the stat 2 to 3 years ago. Obviously, we are now in 2020. Influencer marketing was projected to be like a $10 billion market. And the beauty and kind of the power in influencer marketing, the reason that it's really taken off is because marketers and brands, and really large brands, are figuring out that they can get more bang for their buck actually by paying, and I'm not going to say necessarily these huge megastars, although sometimes it's still even more cost effective for them to work with a Kim Kardashian, although she really gets a lot. All of the Kardashians and people like Beyonce and Ellen, I mean, they get a lot for just writing a single post. They get 6 figures, sometimes even 7 figures. And as big as those numbers sound for what they do, that can still be more cost effective for a major company or a major brand than them spending several $1 million on a Super Bowl ad or on some other type of TV ad, national ad, where they don't always get a great ROI. But when you look at kind of the next tier of influencers, which are kind of mid-level influencers, or even what's known as micro influencers, which frankly, a micro influencer could be someone like myself or like any of you on. If you've built a following, if you have, and sometimes the following can be as few as 5,000 people, 10,000 people. It doesn't have to be 100,000 or 50,000. But if you have a really engaged audience, a really engaged online community, there are companies, there are brands that are interested in that, and they will pay to interact with your community. And you can do the same thing as a business owner in working with an influencer. So you could choose to position yourself as an influencer, or you can partner with an influencer as a way of getting the word out about your own products and services. And again, it can be very cost effective and provide you a much better ROI than some of the other things that perhaps you've been doing. And don't be afraid to pitch major brands, major companies. Again, whether it's as an influencer, whether you're positioning yourself as an influencer or an expert. Maybe you are an expert at what you do. Maybe you are a consultant. Maybe you are a trainer. You should absolutely do your research. If this is something you haven't already done, make a list of 10 to 20, perhaps even 50, if you're feeling ambitious, companies or brands that you would like to work with, that you believe you can add value to. And then, do some research and find out who you need to reach out to with those companies and find out what is it that they really need, especially now with us being in the environment we're in, being in a crisis. A number of businesses are looking for ways to pivot and to utilize resources that perhaps they were not using before. And so you absolutely want to look for those opportunities. And then the last example in terms of pivoting your business model is going from B to C to B to B. So I'm speaking of if you are a business serving consumers, if your market, your target market is individual consumers, again, not telling you that you should stop that, because in some cases that works very well. I am saying to consider shifting some of that to B2B. That could be a game changer. And again, in particular, although not only for, but I would say in particular for service providers, if you, again, do consulting, coaching, training, it's almost a no-brainer that you can offer those services to a corporation. I understand if you've been working more with individuals. I work a lot with small business owners, with entrepreneurs, but I also work with organizations. I've also done some speaking and training for corporations, and realize that typically corporations, and even more so those in those industries that we talked about that tend to be more recession proof or crisis proof, they have budgets. They still have budgets, and many of them have big budgets. So, sometimes when we are struggling to get the business that we want and get clients to pay us what we want to be paid and what we feel we deserve to be paid, it could be a matter of adjusting your business model and going after companies, going after businesses. And realize that small business, the term small business, is somewhat broad. Understand that there are 23 to 24 million small businesses in the US alone. We're not talking globally, just in the US. And so sometimes when we think of small business, we tend to think of mom and pop shops. We think of, micro businesses or solopreneurs, sole proprietorships, which do make up a big part of those 23 to 24 million businesses. But don't forget, there are also small, and those of you who see me, I'm doing air quotes, there are small businesses that have 100 employees. There are small businesses that have 200, 500 or more employees. In terms of market cap, a small business can have as much as $1 billion. That's with a B, up to $1 billion in revenue, in market cap. So your small business could actually be kind of a medium-sized business. It could be, what I'm really getting at, it could be businesses with larger budgets that can bring in a trainer, bring in a speaker, bring in a coach for their employees. And one other thing I'll say about that, whenever you can tie in what you do, and this is for product-based businesses as well. If you sell jewelry, if you sell accessories, if you sell health supplements, maybe the oils, that's become a big thing. If you can tie that in to making employees' lives easier, minimizing their stress, and tie that into productivity, increasing their productivity, that can make a big difference. That can get you in the door, because corporations and medium-sized to large businesses, they are all about the bottom line. Now, frankly, we all should be about the bottom line, but they tend to be even more so. And so they are concerned about what value you can add that will add to their bottom line. So sometimes, it may require you to get a bit creative and really look at your product or service in a different way. But if you can do that, if you can tie it into minimizing stress, increasing productivity, that can be a way, kind of your way to get in the door with that business. So we are close to wrapping up here. I do want to share kind of a bonus strategy with you. And I said earlier that I would get more into the whole niche and niching down, if you will, because this is something again I see it a lot. I see a number of business owners struggling with this because again we want to help as many people as possible, and I get that. I appreciate that's been my mindset as well. But the reason for niching down and why it can work so well, because I know it may seem a bit confusing, or it may be confusing for some, but it's really because you can get to know that niche a lot better. You can market a lot more effectively to a particular group. The more you know about them, the more specific you are with that group, the more you can speak to them. You can speak their language, and they know that you really get them. Remember what I said before. There's no like and trust, and then the client, the customer, needs to know that you know them. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. So a few other examples for niching down. Again, let's say that you work with small businesses. We were just talking about small businesses, and I just shared how many small businesses we have just in the US alone. All right, there's 23, 24 million. So you could, one example of niching down from there, you could say, well, I want to work with women-owned businesses. And that's something I hear a lot. I work a lot with women-owned businesses. I hear that from a number of ladies, a few guys too, who work with women-owned businesses. So that is kind of one level of niching, but you can go further than that because that's still really broad. And so think about for your particular product or service, does it require local customers or clients? I mean, we're all in HCC, at least those of us on now, or in Houston, excuse me. And so is your client specifically in Houston? Is your client specifically in Texas, or does that not matter? Maybe you are an online business, or you have an online presence and you can serve clients beyond Texas, beyond even the United States. So think about that. That can be a way to further niche down. And then by industry, I know people who only work with people in certain industries. I know people who only work, their clients are only in the IT field. Their clients are only in healthcare. And so think about different ways that you can further niche down. I have talked about this with realtors. I've done trainings in the past for realtors, and I see this a lot with realtors. I still remember meeting a realtor at a networking event. This has been about a couple of years ago, and asking her who was her target market, or what is her target market. I mean, because sometimes, it could be a particular area. And she said, anyone who's looking to buy a house. Thought, And sometimes when you first meet someone, now for me, sometimes it's difficult because although I am somewhat of an introvert, I'm also pretty opinionated and vocal, and the consultant and strategist in me comes out. So I kind of tempered my response, but I did say, I I think you should reconsider that. And I told her that because I hear that a lot. Another example, I've met uh, ladies who do Mary Kay, and they'll say, well, my target, who is your target market? Who is your niche? One lady, and I'll never forget this, she said, anyone with skin. Okay. Brenda's laughing. No. Oh, yeah, everyone's laughing. No, actually, it's not. It's not. And I attribute that to a couple of things. Sometimes, I mean, I'm just going to say it. Sometimes it's just lazy marketing. It's not taking the time to really, really get to know your customer, your client. And sometimes they just don't know. Sometimes it's still kind of taking that mass marketing approach and wanting to reach as many people as possible. But guys, I tell you, that is the way to burn yourself out, to also burn out your marketing dollars, because you're trying to reach too large of a market. So just even dealing with those two examples for a realtor, know your target market should not be anyone who needs a house, because it depends on what kind of house you're looking to sell. Do you even operate in the residential real estate space? If you're commercial, then that's a whole different ball game. And even if you are in residential, maybe you should consider actually going the other direction and just dealing with the affluent, just selling houses on the higher end. I know realtors who don't sell homes less than $500,000. And for some people, that's a little intimidating, but it shouldn't be. Now, it's one thing if you don't want to operate in that market. I mean, that's totally up to you. But don't not do it. I know that's not the best grammar, but y'all get what I'm saying. Don't not do it because you're either intimidated or you think that's not going to work, that you're going to alienate too many other potential buyers. No, the way I see it, your commission is a lot higher, and that means you have to sell less homes to reach your revenue goals. And so that's one way to look at it. You could choose to focus on first time home buyers. You could become the go-to realtor for healthcare or for those in IT. I mean, you could become like the expert for people in that industry. And then with the whole Mary Kay example, all right, you got to look at Mary Kay. And I don't know any guys on, if you guys are familiar with Mary Kay. Most, if not all, ladies are familiar with Mary Kay. For one thing, Mary Kay can be somewhat expensive. Now, it depends on, how you view expensive. I've purchased Mary Kay. I have Mary Kay products, but everyone is not in the market for Mary Kay. Mary Kay is not affordable for everyone. And so again, you have to really look at your product, look at your service, and really determine who is going to most benefit from your product or service, as well as who can afford it. Both of those go hand in hand. Both of those are really important. So again, I want to really encourage you not to shy away from, not to be intimidated by niching down as much as you can. And even if that market, that niche down market seems smaller, I can almost guarantee you it's more than enough for you to do very well, because you're starting with such a large market. So even after niching down 2, 3, 4 times, you probably still have a market of 500,000 people. If you're dealing with organizations, you probably still have a market of 1,000 or more organizations. I mean, unless, you're super, super, super niche. Mm-hmm. So just, keep that in mind and realize that niching, targeting can absolutely be a game changer. So guys, I just want to share with you, as we wrap up, a couple of resources available, and these are free resources. One is the Strategic Hustle Playbook, because I know you guys are out there hustling, and I have nothing against hustling, but I think you should hustle smarter, and I think you should hustle strategically. Don't just hustle blindly. Don't just hustle because, certain people are telling you, you got to hustle. There needs to be a strategy in your hustle. And so one way to help you do that is an online resource that I offer. And this is provided every week. And it's your weekly dose, essentially, of strategy, innovation, amazing people doing amazing things. And some of those people that you may not hear about ordinarily, or maybe not in the mainstream media. So that is a free resource that you can take advantage of at www.bit.ly/hustle strategy. Okay. bit.ly/hustle strategy. And then I do offer complimentary brand to profit sessions. And I'll also add to that, although it's not there on the slide, digital marketing upgrade sessions. Both of those are complimentary because some of the services we offer also has to do with social media marketing, digital marketing, really maximizing those resources and specializing in LinkedIn and um, Instagram, actually LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. But if you also want to talk about really how to define and develop your brand and positioning your brand, positioning your services for success, then you certainly can take advantage of one of those sessions. That is complimentary. They're limited. They're complimentary, but they're limited. So I encourage you to jump on that sooner rather than later. And you can do so at swagstrategy.com/contact. Again, swagstrategy.com/contact. And that does it for me.
That was perfect. Thank you so much, Rachel. I really, really learned a lot. I mean, I feel like a lot of people are just thinking of the online and virtual way of pivoting, but I mean, there are so many more opportunities out there, such as you said, collaboration and kind of niching down into your own market. So that's amazing.
Sure.
Thank you so much for being here with us. I know Selena posted a question or more like, a
Okay.
suggestion of sending out this link. So she'll be sharing this with her colleagues. And so at the end of this recording, we will make sure we send it out to everybody who registered for this course, as well as on social media, so that more people can access to your resources as well. All right.
Great. Great.
Well, awesome. If there's no more questions, I think we are done here. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Rachel. Enjoyed it very much.
Thank you. And you guys have a great weekend.
Yeah, you too.
Take care.
Take care. Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.